They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but when I watched my husband take another woman's hand and dance with her at our 10th wedding anniversary party, right in front of our 8-year-old son, right in front of everyone who mattered to us, I felt something ignite inside me that was anything but cold. Before I tell you what I did next, I need you to understand something. I need you to see how perfectly David had crafted the illusion of our marriage, how masterfully he had painted himself as the devoted husband while slowly, methodically destroying everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and family. And if you're watching this from somewhere in the world where betrayal feels like a foreign concept, I envy you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're from. Maybe there's hope for humanity after all. But if you've ever felt that moment when your entire world shifts beneath your feet, when someone you trusted with your life reveals themselves to be a stranger wearing your husband's face, then please stay with me. Hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to share isn't just my story. It's a roadmap for anyone who's ever been underestimated, anyone who's ever been pushed too far. My name is Rebecca, and this is the story of how I lost everything and found myself in the process. The morning of our anniversary started like a scene from a romantic movie. David brought me coffee in bed, my favorite ceramic mug, the one with the chip on the handle that he always threatened to throw away, but never did. He sat on the edge of our bed, still in his pajama pants, hair messy from sleep, looking exactly like the man I fell in love with 12 years ago. "Happy anniversary, beautiful," he said, and his smile was so genuine, so warm, that for a moment I forgot about all the late nights, all the business trips that seemed to multiply like weeds, all the times his phone buzzed with messages he quickly dismissed as work stuff. I should have known then. I should have recognized the performance. "I can't believe it's been 10 years, I said, reaching up to smooth down his hair the way I had 1,000 times before. "Remember when we used to joke that we'd be that boring couple who celebrated anniversaries with dinner at Applebee's?" He laughed, but there was something hollow in it that I didn't catch at the time. "Instead, we're throwing a party for 50 people. Look how fancy we've become." Our son Joshua bounded into the room then, all knees and elbows and excitement, jumping onto the bed between us. At 8 years old, he was the perfect mixture of David's analytical mind and what I thought was my creative spirit. He had his father's dark hair but my green eyes, and when he smiled, it was like watching pure joy take human form. "Is today the party day?" he asked, bouncing slightly on the mattress. "Can I help set up the decorations?" "Of course, buddy," David said, ruffling Josh's hair. "We need all the help we can get." The scene was so perfect, so natural, that even now, months later, I can barely reconcile it with what I know was happening behind those warm brown eyes. David was planning. David was calculating. David was counting down the hours until he could humiliate me in front of everyone we knew. We spent the morning transforming our backyard into something magical. David had hired a team to set up string lights that created a canopy of stars above the patio. There were round tables with white linens, centerpieces of white roses and baby's breath, a small wooden dance floor that looked like something out of a fairy tale. It was everything I had dreamed of for our anniversary celebration. "This is incredible," I told him as we stood together, surveying the transformation. "It's like our wedding day all over again." "That's the point," he said, and kissed my forehead. "You deserve to feel like a princess again." The guests started arriving at 6. Our families, our closest friends, neighbors we'd shared barbecues with for years, colleagues from both our jobs. David worked in commercial real estate, and I was a freelance graphic designer working mostly with small local businesses. We had built what looked like a perfect life in our suburban neighborhood, the kind of life that made other people envious, the kind that looked flawless from the outside. My sister Emma arrived with her husband Mark and their twin daughters, who immediately ran off to find Joshua. Emma had always been the cautious one, the one who asked too many questions, the one who noticed things others missed. As she hugged me, she whispered, "You look radiant. This is beautiful, Becca." But even then, I caught something in her eyes. A hesitation, a concern she didn't voice. My parents came next, followed by David's mother Patricia, who had driven up from Florida for the celebration. Patricia had never quite warmed to me. I wasn't the successful lawyer or Dr. Sheeting vision for her precious son, but she was civil, even kind when it suited her. David has outdone himself, she said, kissing my cheek with lips that barely touched skin. Such attention to detail. He always was the thoughtful one. The implication stung, as it always did with Patricia. David was thoughtful. I was not. David was successful. I was not. David was worthy of celebration. I was simply the lucky recipient of his generosity. By 7:30, the party was in full swing. David played the perfect host, moving from group to group with a beer in his hand and that easy smile that had first attracted me to him at a friend's wedding all those years ago. I watched him laugh with our neighbors, discuss market trends with his colleagues, chase the kids around the yard until they shrieked with delight. I felt proud. I felt grateful. I felt like the luckiest woman alive. That's when I saw her. She was standing near the edge of the patio, partially hidden by the jasmine bushes that lined our fence. At first, I thought she might be someone's plus one, someone I hadn't met yet. She was beautiful in that effortless way some women manage, long blonde hair that caught the light, a simple black dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, posture that spoke of confidence and success. She was watching David. Not the casual watching of a party guest observing their host, but the intimate watching of someone who knew him. Someone who had studied the way he moved, the way he gestured when he told stories, the way he unconsciously ran his hand through his hair when he was nervous. I moved closer, weaving through our guests with a smile plastered on my face, my internal alarm system beginning to sound. When David noticed her, his entire body language changed. The easy confidence shifted into something more electric, more alive. That's when I knew. Before they spoke a word to each other, before they exchanged so much as a glance that others might notice, I knew that this woman was not just a guest at our anniversary party. She was the reason for all those late nights, all those mysterious phone calls, all those business trips that had become so frequent I'd started marking them on the calendar just to keep track. She was David's other life. The realization hit me like a physical blow, but I couldn't react. Not here, not in front of everyone. I was trapped in my role as the gracious hostess, the devoted wife, the woman who had everything she could ever want. So I smiled and nodded and made small talk while inside. Everything I thought I knew about my life was crumbling. Her name was Victoria, and she introduced herself to me as if we were meeting at a coffee shop rather than at my wedding anniversary party. "You must be Rebecca," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I've heard so much about you." The audacity of it took my breath away. Here was my husband's mistress, standing in my backyard, surrounded by the roses I had planted, under the lights David had hung to celebrate our marriage, telling me she'd heard about me. As if I were the side character in my own story. "I don't believe we've met," I managed, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. "Are you here with someone?" "David invited me," she said simply. "We work together." It was a lie wrapped in just enough truth to be believable to anyone listening. David's real estate firm did occasionally work with marketing consultants, event planners, various business associates. To anyone overhearing our conversation, Victoria would seem perfectly legitimate. But I saw the way she said his name. David. Not Mr. Harrison or your husband. Just David, with the familiarity of someone who had whispered it in the dark. "How lovely," I said. "David is always bringing work home with him these days." If she caught the double meaning, she didn't show it. Instead, she smiled. A smile that was probably meant to be friendly, but felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. "He's such a dedicated man," she said. "You're very lucky." The conversation continued for another few minutes, surface-level pleasantries about the party, the weather, the beautiful decorations. All the while, I was studying her face, looking for cracks in her composure, trying to understand what kind of woman attends her married lover's anniversary party. What I found was someone who seemed genuinely at ease. Someone who felt she belonged here. Someone who looked at me with what I can only describe as pity. When she excused herself to get a drink, I stood frozen for a moment, watching her move through my party like she owned it. Several people nodded to her, clearly having met her already. David's colleague Marcus even gave her a friendly wave from across the yard. How long had this been going on? How many people knew? How had I become the only person at my own anniversary party who didn't understand what was really happening? I found Emma in the kitchen, helping herself to more wine. I said, grabbing her arm. The blonde woman by the bar. Do you know who she is? Emma followed my gaze through the sliding glass door. You mean Victoria? Yeah. David introduced her earlier. Said she works with him. Why? He introduced her to you? To everyone, I think. She seems nice. Very put together. Emma studied my face. Becca, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to grab my sister and pour out everything I was feeling, every suspicion that had been building for months, every late-night moment when I'd lain awake wondering if I was losing my mind or if David really was pulling away from me. Instead, I forced another smile. Nothing. I just thought I recognized her from somewhere. Probably saw her at one of David's work events. But Emma knew me too well. She set down her wine glass and turned to face me fully. Rebecca Marie, I've known you for 34 years. Something is very wrong. What is it? Before I could answer, David appeared in the kitchen doorway. There you are, he said, but his eyes were on Emma, not me. People are asking about the anniversary toast. I thought we could do it now, before dessert is served. Of course, I said automatically. Let me just touch up my lipstick. In our master bathroom, I stared at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, someone playing the role of Rebecca Harrison, devoted wife and mother, gracious hostess and pillar of the community. Someone who had no idea that her husband had invited his mistress to their anniversary party. Someone who was about to stand in front of 50 people and celebrate 10 years of marriage that had apparently been built on lies. I reapplied my lipstick with hands that barely trembled, smoothed down my dress, a blue wrap dress that David had said brought out my eyes, and walked back outside to play my part. The toast was everything you'd expect from a 10th anniversary celebration. David took my hand and spoke about love and commitment, about the journey we'd shared and the future we were building together. He talked about our beautiful son, our wonderful families, the community of friends who had supported us through the years. To my incredible wife, he concluded, raising his champagne glass. Thank you for making every day an adventure, for being my best friend and my greatest love. Here's to the next 10 years. Everyone applauded. People cheered. Someone called out, "Kiss her," and David obliged, pulling me close and kissing me like he meant it. And through it all, Victoria stood at the edge of the crowd, smiling like she was watching a performance she'd paid to see. The party continued for another 2 hours. I played my role perfectly, laughing at jokes, thanking people for coming, accepting compliments on the decorations and the food. I danced with my father to At Last by Etta James, the same song that had been our father-daughter dance at my wedding. I helped Joshua navigate the dessert table, watching him pile his plate high with chocolate cake and strawberry tart. And I watched David. I watched him talk to Victoria 3 separate times throughout the evening. Conversations that looked casual, professional, appropriate. But I knew him well enough to read the signs others might miss. The way he angled his body toward her. The way his voice dropped slightly when they spoke. The way his hand lingered just a moment too long when he handed her a fresh drink. Most telling of all was what happened when the DJ announced the last dance of the evening. It was supposed to be our song, Amazed by Lone Star, the same song we'd danced to at our wedding 10 years ago. David should have found me immediately, should have taken my hand, and led me onto the dance floor for a moment. Instead, I watched him scan the crowd, his eyes moving past me entirely, searching for someone else. He found Victoria near the garden gate, looking like she was preparing to leave. And in that moment, something shifted in David's face. The polite host mask fell away, replaced by something raw and desperate and real. That's when I knew this wasn't just an affair. This was love. David was in love with her. The realization should have destroyed me right there, should have sent me to my knees in the middle of my beautifully decorated backyard. Instead, it crystallized something inside me, something cold and sharp and calculating. I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to give either of them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I was going to plan. But first, I had to survive the rest of the evening. I had to smile and wave goodbye to our guests, had to help clean up the remnants of our celebration, had to tuck Joshua into bed and listen to him chatter excitedly about how much fun the party had been. Dad looked really happy tonight, he said as I pulled his blanket up to his chin. I like it when he's happy. Me too, sweetheart, I whispered, kissing his forehead. Sweet dreams. By midnight, the house was quiet. The caterers had cleaned up, the rental company would come for the tables and lights in the morning, and David was in his study, claiming he needed to wrap up a few work things before bed. I lay in our king-size bed, staring at the ceiling, and began to plan my husband's destruction. 3 weeks passed before David made his fatal mistake. 3 weeks during which I became someone I didn't recognize, a wife who smiled over breakfast while secretly photographing bank statements, a mother who helped with homework while mentally cataloging assets, a woman who made love to her husband while planning his downfall. If you've ever lived a double life, you know how exhausting it is. Every conversation becomes a performance, every gesture calculated, every emotion measured against its potential usefulness. But I was learning that I had a talent for deception that surprised even me. The breakthrough came on a Thursday morning in late September. David's phone buzzed with a text while he was in the shower, and for the first time in our marriage, he had left it on the nightstand instead of taking it with him. The message preview was visible on the lock screen. Victoria, can't wait for Saturday. I've been dreaming about. My hands were remarkably steady as I picked up his phone and used his thumbprint to unlock it while he sang in the shower, a habit that had once charmed me and now made me want to scream. The full message read, "Can't wait for Saturday. I've been dreaming about being in your arms again. This sneaking around is killing me, but it makes every moment we have together feel electric. I love you, David. More than I ever thought possible." His response, sent just minutes before a shower. "Saturday can't come fast enough. I love you too, V. More than life itself. Soon we won't have to hide anymore." Saturday. 2 days away. 2 days to prepare for whatever David was planning. I scrolled through their conversation history, and what I found was a masterclass in betrayal. Messages dating back 8 months. 8 months of "I love you," and "I need you," and "someday we'll be together properly." Photos that made my stomach turn, not because they were explicit, but because they showed David looking at her the way he used to look at me. But the most devastating discovery came in a conversation from just 3 days earlier. "Victoria, when are you going to tell her? I can't keep pretending much longer." "David, soon. I promise. After the holidays, when things settle down with Josh's school year. I just need to figure out the logistics." "Victoria, logistics?" "David, we're talking about your marriage, not a business merger." "David, I know. But Rebecca is going to make this difficult. She'll fight for everything, the house, custody, alimony. I need to protect our future, V. I need to make sure she can't destroy what we're building. Victoria, I trust you. But I need to know this is real, that you're serious about us." "David, Saturday night will prove how serious I am. I have something special planned." Saturday night. Our annual Homeowners Association Fall Festival, held in the community center just 2 blocks from our house. A family event where David and I always volunteered, where Joshua looked forward to the face painting and carnival games, where we had been the poster couple for suburban happiness for the past 5 years. David was planning something for Saturday night, something to prove his commitment to Victoria. And suddenly I understood exactly what it was going to be. If you're watching this and you've ever felt that moment when all the pieces fall into place, when you can see the trap being set before it springs, then you know the mixture of terror and power I felt in that moment. Please, if this story is resonating with you, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Your support means everything when you're walking through hell. Friday passed in a blur of normal activities. David went to work, I met with clients, Joshua had soccer practice. But underneath the routine, I was preparing. I made phone calls during lunch breaks, sent carefully worded emails, and began moving pieces on a chessboard David didn't even know we were playing on. The call to my lawyer, Helen Martinez, was the hardest. Helen had handled our wills, and the purchase of our house had become something of a friend over the years. She knew David, liked him, had often commented on what a strong marriage we seemed to have. "Rebecca," she said when I called. "What can I do for you? More estate planning?" "No, Helen. I need to discuss divorce proceedings." The silence on the other end lasted so long I wondered if the call had dropped. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "Did you say divorce? You and David?" "I have evidence of an extended affair. I need to know what my options are, and I need to know quickly. I think he's planning to ask for a divorce himself, and I want to be prepared." "Okay," Helen said, her voice shifting into professional mode. "Can you come in this afternoon? We need to discuss asset protection, custody considerations, documentation of the adultery." By Friday evening, I had a plan. Not just a plan for divorce proceedings, but a plan for Saturday night. A plan that would give David exactly what he was hoping for in a way he would never expect. Saturday arrived with a kind of crisp autumn weather that makes suburban festivals feel magical. The community center buzzed with families setting up booths, children racing around with face-painted cheeks, volunteers hanging streamers, and arranging pumpkins. David was unusually attentive that morning, helping Joshua pick out his costume for the costume contest, making pancakes shaped like jack-o'-lanterns, even suggesting we take family photos by the big oak tree in our front yard. For the Christmas cards, he said, setting up his phone camera, "We want to remember this perfect fall day." I smiled and posed and held Joshua close, all while knowing this would likely be our last family photo for a very long time. At the festival, we fell into our usual routine. I ran the face-painting booth with two other moms, David helped with the ring toss game, and Joshua ran from activity to activity with his friends. From the outside, we looked like the family everyone else aspired to be. But I was watching for Victoria. She arrived around 6, just as the sun was setting and the string lights around the community center were beginning to twinkle. She had Joshua with her, not our Joshua, but a boy about the same age with sandy hair and freckles. Her son, I realized. The child David would inherit when he left us for his new family. The boy ran immediately toward the carnival games, but Victoria moved more slowly, scanning the crowd until she found David. Even from across the park, I could see the moment their eyes met. The electricity Helen had mentioned in her texts was practically visible. David excused himself from the ring toss booth and began moving through the crowd toward her. Not directly, that would have been too obvious, but in a meandering path that took him past the pumpkin display, the bake sale table, the costume contest staging area. I finished painting a butterfly on a little girl's cheek and told my co-volunteers I needed a quick break. Then I began following my husband as he made his way toward his mistress. They met near the edge of the parking lot, in the shadow of the big elm tree that had been the centerpiece of our neighborhood since before the community center was built. I positioned myself behind the dessert table, close enough to watch but hidden by the elaborate Halloween display one of the neighbors had created. What I saw broke my heart and crystallized my resolve at the same time. David took Victoria's hands in his, and they stood there talking in low voices, their heads close together like teenagers sharing secrets. She laughed at something he said, and he reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so intimate, so tender, that I had to look away for a moment. When I looked back, they were walking hand in hand toward the community center, toward the music and lights and families celebrating together, toward the dance floor that had been set up in the center of the main hall. This was it. This was David's grand gesture, his proof to Victoria that he was ready to choose her over everything else. He was going to dance with his mistress at a community event where everyone knew us, where our son was playing with his friends just 50 feet away, where I was supposedly safely occupied with face painting and would never see what was happening. I thought about stopping him. I thought about making a scene, about confronting them both in front of everyone, about screaming and crying and demanding answers. Instead, I pulled out my phone and began recording. The community center had been transformed for the evening dance. What had been a simple rectangular space filled with folding tables and Halloween decorations was now dimly lit by string lights and paper lanterns. The DJ, someone's teenager earning extra money, had set up in one corner, and families were swaying to a mix of classic rock and current pop hits. I positioned myself near the refreshment table, phone ready, heart hammering so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. From where I stood, I had a perfect view of the dance floor and the main entrance. More importantly, I could see Joshua, who was playing some elaborate chase game with 5 other kids near the costume contest area. David and Victoria entered the hall together, though they had carefully positioned themselves to look like they had arrived separately. Victoria went to check on her son, who was attempting to fish for prizes in a kiddie pool filled with plastic pumpkins. David made a show of looking around for me, waving when he spotted me across the room. "How's the face painting going?" he called out, loud enough for several people to hear. "Great," I called back, holding up my palette of half-used paints. "Just taking a quick break." He gave me a thumbs up and moved toward the drink station. Perfectly normal husband behavior. Perfectly innocent. But I was watching Victoria, and I saw the moment she nodded almost imperceptibly toward the dance floor. The DJ had been playing upbeat songs, Uptown Funk, and Can't Stop the Feeling, the kind of music that gets families moving together. But as I watched, someone approached him with a request. I couldn't see who it was from my angle, but I had a pretty good guess. The current song faded out, and the opening notes of At Last began to play. The same Etta James classic that had been our wedding song, the song I danced with my father just 3 weeks earlier at our anniversary party. My phone was already recording when David moved onto the dance floor. Not toward me, toward Victoria. She met him halfway, and when he extended his hand to her, she took it with the grace of someone who had done this before. Someone who belonged in his arms. They began to dance. Not the careful, appropriate dancing of acquaintances at a community event. Not the friendly swaying of work colleagues being polite. This was the dancing of 2 people deeply, desperately in love. David held Victoria close, his hand splayed across her back in a gesture of protection and possession. She had her head tilted back to look at him, and even from across the room, I could see her saying something that made him smile the way he used to smile at me. The other dancers on the floor, mostly married couples and a few brave teenagers, seemed to sense something significant was happening. A few people moved to the edges, giving David and Victoria more space. Others stopped dancing altogether to watch. Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down leaned toward her husband and whispered something that made him frown. The Martinez family, our next-door neighbors, exchanged confused glances. I saw Emma's friend Sarah point toward the dance floor and say something urgent to her husband. But David and Victoria were lost in their own world. As the song reached its crescendo, "At last, my love has come along," David spun Victoria slowly, then pulled her back to him with a flourish that spoke of practiced intimacy. That's when I saw Joshua. He had stopped his game with the other children and was staring at the dance floor with the confused expression of a child trying to make sense of something that didn't fit his understanding of the world. His father, who was supposed to be married to his mother, was dancing with a stranger like she was the most important person in the universe. Our eyes met across the crowded room. Joshua looked at me, then back at David and Victoria, then at me again. His 8-year-old face was a study in bewilderment, and the beginning of something that might have been betrayal. That was the moment I stopped recording and started moving. I wove through the crowd, past the dessert table and the costume contest display, past families who were trying not to stare at the drama unfolding on the dance floor. My phone was safely tucked in my pocket, the evidence secured, but now I had a more important mission. I reached Joshua just as the song was ending. David dipped Victoria dramatically, and she laughed, a sound of pure joy that carried across the hall. When they straightened, they were close enough to kiss, and for a moment, I thought they might actually do it. "Mommy," Joshua whispered, tugging on my sleeve. "Why is Daddy dancing with that lady?" The question every cheated-on spouse dreads, asked by the one person whose opinion matters more than anyone else's. I knelt down to Joshua's level, my mind racing through possible responses. The truth was too much. Lies would only confuse him more. But I had to say something. "Daddy's just being polite, sweetheart," I said, hating myself for the deception. "Sometimes grown-ups dance with friends at parties. But he doesn't dance with your friends like that," Joshua said with the devastating logic of childhood. "He looks at her the way he looks at you in the wedding pictures." Before I could respond, the song ended and David finally seemed to remember where he was. He looked around the room, at the faces watching him, at the whispered conversations, at the cell phones that had appeared in several hands to capture what had just happened. His eyes found mine across the dance floor, and I saw the exact moment reality crashed back into his fantasy. But it was too late. Everyone had seen. Everyone knew. The damage was done. Victoria seemed to realize it too. She stepped back from David quickly, her face flushing as she became aware of the attention they had drawn. She mumbled something to him, an apology or an excuse, and hurried toward the exit, grabbing her son's hand as she passed. David stood alone on the dance floor for a moment, looking lost and exposed under the string lights that had seemed so romantic just minutes before. Then he began walking toward me, that familiar smile sliding back into place like a mask. "Hey," he said when he reached us, his voice carefully casual. "Did you see that? Victoria asked me to dance, and I didn't want to be rude. You know how these work events can be, politics and all that." The lie came so easily, so smoothly, that I almost admired his skill. Almost. "Of course," I said, matching his casual tone. "Very thoughtful of you." Joshua was still looking between us, his confusion obvious to anyone paying attention. But David seemed oblivious to his son's distress, already moving into damage control mode. "Should we head home?" he asked. "Josh looks tired." I looked at our son, who did indeed look tired and confused, and like his world had tilted just enough off-axis to make everything feel uncertain. "Yes," I said. "Let's go home." We gathered our things, my face-painting supplies, Joshua's prize from the ring toss, David's volunteer badge, and walked to our car like a normal family ending a normal evening. We drove the 2 blocks home in silence, Joshua falling asleep in his car seat, David humming softly to the radio. But when we pulled into our driveway, when David turned off the engine, and we sat in the darkness of our garage, I finally spoke. "David," I said quietly, making sure Joshua was still sleeping. "We need to talk." He turned to look at me, and in the dim light from the garage door opener, I saw something flicker across his face. Fear, maybe. Or relief. "Yeah," he said. "I guess we do." But what David didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that while he had been performing his grand romantic gesture, I had been making phone calls of my own. While he had been dancing with his mistress in front of our son and our entire community, I had been setting in motion a plan that would strip away every single thing he thought he could count on. By morning, David Harrison was going to understand exactly what it felt like to lose everything that mattered. He just didn't know it yet. We put Joshua to bed together that night, maintaining the facade of normalcy even as the tension between us stretched tighter with each passing minute. David read from Where the Crawdads Sing, Joshua's current favorite, while I organized the boys' backpack for Monday school. We moved around each other in the familiar choreography of parents, but everything felt different now, charged with unspoken truths. "Good night, buddy," David said, kissing Joshua's forehead. "Good night, Daddy," Joshua mumbled, already half asleep. But then he opened his eyes and looked directly at his father. "Daddy, do you love Mommy?" The question hung in the air like smoke. David's hand froze on the light switch, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. "Of course I do, Josh," David said after a pause that lasted a heartbeat too long. "Why would you ask that?" "Just wondering," Joshua said, turning onto his side. "Sometimes it's hard to tell. Children see everything. They absorb the subtleties adults think they're hiding, the changes in energy and affection that we convince ourselves are invisible." As we left Joshua's room and walked down the hallway toward our bedroom, I wondered how long our son had been aware that something was wrong. David closed our bedroom door and leaned against it, finally allowing his composed mask to slip. "Okay," he said. "Let's get this over with. Get this over with." As if our conversation was a dentist appointment or a traffic ticket he needed to pay. As if the destruction of our family was just another item on his to-do list. "You want to explain what happened tonight?" I asked, sitting on the edge of our bed, the bed where we'd made love just 2 nights before, where he'd held me and whispered that he loved me while texting another woman. David ran his hand through his hair, a nervous habit I'd found endearing for 12 years.
Now it just irritated me.
It got out of hand, he said. Victoria asked me to dance, and I was trying to be professional. You know how important these community relationships are for the business. Another lie. Another smooth deflection. I wondered if he even remembered that I had eyes, that I had watched him seek her out, watched him choose her over the wife who was standing 50 feet away. David, I said quietly, please don't insult my intelligence. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the moment he decided to try a different approach. Okay, he said, moving to sit in the armchair across from our bed. You're right. There's something between Victoria and me. It's complicated. Complicated. The refuge of every cheating spouse, the word that made adultery sound like a math problem rather than a choice to betray the person who trusted you most. How long? I asked. Rebecca. How long, David? He closed his eyes. 8 months. 8 months. Not a moment of weakness, not a mistake, not a midlife crisis that got out of hand. 8 months of deliberate deception. 8 months of choosing her over me every single day. Do you love her? I asked. The question seemed to surprise him. He opened his eyes and looked at me with something that might have been confusion. Yes, he said finally. I think I do. There it was. The truth I had known since I watched them dance. The truth that had been growing in my chest like a tumor since the night of our anniversary party. My husband was in love with another woman. And us? I asked. What about us? What about Joshua? I don't know, he said, and for the first time that evening, he sounded genuinely lost. I don't know how to fix this, Rebecca. I don't know if I want to. The honesty was almost worse than the lies. At least when he was lying, I could hate him cleanly, completely. This raw vulnerability made him human again, made him the man I had fallen in love with, made everything infinitely more complicated. But I couldn't afford complications.
Not now.
Not when I had a son to protect and a life to rebuild. I need some time to think, I said. I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight. David nodded, relief obvious on his face. He didn't have to pretend anymore, didn't have to lie next to me while thinking of her. Rebecca, he said as I reached the door. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this. I turned to look at him one last time, this man who had been my partner, my best friend, the father of my child. This man who had just destroyed our family because he fell in love with someone else. But you did want it, I said softly. Every time you texted her, every time you met her for lunch, every time you chose to spend time with her instead of coming home to your family, you wanted it. You just didn't want the consequences. I closed the door between us and walked down the hall to the guest room, where I spent the longest night of my life staring at the ceiling and finalizing my plans. Because while David had been confessing and seeking absolution, while he had been trying to manage the aftermath of his public humiliation, I had been 3 steps ahead of him. During his conversation with Joshua at bedtime, I had sent a text message. During his fumbling attempts at explanation, I had made a phone call. And in the morning, Sunday morning, when David would wake up expecting to begin the slow, painful process of untangling our marriage, he was going to discover exactly how naive he had been. He was going to learn that the woman he had dismissed as a small-town graphic designer, the woman he thought would crumble under the weight of his betrayal, was actually someone he had never known at all. By Sunday afternoon, David Harrison was going to be homeless, broke, and completely alone.
He just didn't know it yet.
The thing about revenge, if you're listening from somewhere in the world where betrayal still has consequences, is that it requires patience. It requires you to think several moves ahead while your heart is breaking, to plan while you're grieving, to calculate while you're dying inside. If you've ever been pushed to that edge, you know what I'm talking about. And if this story is hitting close to home, please let me know in the comments. Sometimes we need to know we're not alone in the dark. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay in the guest room bed, the bed where my mother had stayed during her visits, where David's friends had crashed after particularly late poker nights, and went over every detail of what would happen in the morning. At 6 a.m., I heard David's alarm go off. Sunday morning routine, coffee, newspaper, maybe some yard work if the weather was nice. He had no idea that while he was sleeping, his entire world had been dismantled with surgical precision. I waited until I heard the coffee maker start, then got up and showered. When I came downstairs, David was sitting at the kitchen island reading news on his tablet, a mug of coffee steaming beside him. He looked up when I entered, and I saw hope flicker across his face. "Good morning," he said carefully. How did you sleep?" "Not well," I said truthfully. "David, we need to continue our conversation from last night." He set down the tablet. "Of course. I've been thinking too, and I want you to know." "Actually," I interrupted, "I think it would be better if we talked outside. Joshua is still sleeping, and I don't want him to overhear anything upsetting." David nodded and followed me onto our back patio, where just 4 weeks earlier we had celebrated 10 years of marriage surrounded by everyone we loved. The decorations were long gone, but I could still see the ghost of that perfect evening, the string lights, the dance floor, the woman in black who had watched my husband toast our future while planning to steal it. "David," I said, settling into one of our outdoor chairs, "I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." He sat across from me, that hopeful expression still lingering around his eyes. He thought this was going to be a negotiation. He thought I was going to fight for him, beg him to choose me, promise to be better if only he would stay. "Last night, after you went to bed, I made some phone calls," I began. "You see, while you were busy planning your romantic gesture with Victoria, I was doing some planning of my own." The hope in his eyes started to fade. "I called Helen Martinez. You remember Helen, she handled our wills, helped us buy this house? Well, it turns out she also handles divorces. Very thorough divorces." David straightened in his chair. "Rebecca, let's not do anything hasty." "I also called my brother Michael in Denver," I continued. "You know, the one who works for that big accounting firm? Turns out he has some very interesting connections in the financial investigation business." Now David was paying attention. Really paying attention. "And then I called my old college roommate Sarah. Remember Sarah? The one who works for that digital marketing firm in Chicago? She's become quite skilled at social media investigation. Amazing what you can find when you know where to look." I pulled out my phone and set it on the table between us. "Would you like to know what they found, David?" David's face had gone completely white. In 12 years of marriage, I had never seen him look genuinely afraid, but as I sat across from him on our patio with my phone between us like a loaded weapon, fear was written across every feature. "Rebecca," he said slowly, "what exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that while you were busy planning your grand romantic gesture, I was discovering some very interesting things about your business dealings, your finances, and your relationship with Victoria." I picked up my phone and opened the first of several folders I had created during my sleepless night. "Let's start with the money, shall we?" I said, scrolling to a series of screenshots. "It turns out that those frequent business trips you've been taking, the ones that always seem to coincide with Victoria needing marketing consultation, weren't just affairs of the heart." David's throat worked as he swallowed hard. "You've been funneling money from your real estate commissions into a joint account with Victoria, an account I'm not on, an account that doesn't appear on any of the financial statements you've been giving me for our household budget." "That's not $63,000, David. $63,000 that should have been part of our family's income, money that should have been going toward Joshua's college fund, toward our retirement, toward the life we were supposed to be building together." I swiped to the next folder. "But that's not the most interesting part. The most interesting part is where that money has been going. Victoria's rent, paid by you. Victoria's car payment, paid by you. Victoria's son's private school tuition, paid by you." David's hands were clenched into fists on the table. "You don't understand." "Oh, but I do understand. I understand that you've been playing house with another family while systematically stealing from your actual family to pay for it." The evidence was overwhelming, and I had spent hours organizing it into a presentation that would have made my business clients proud. Bank records, email receipts, credit card statements, a paper trail of betrayal that went far beyond simple adultery. "Here's my favorite part," I said, opening a third folder. "The apartment you rented for your weekend getaways. The lease is in both your names, David. Joint tenancy, both responsible for rent, utilities, everything. Which means, legally speaking, you've been maintaining a second household. Rebecca, please. Which brings me to the truly fascinating discovery my brother Michael made when he ran your financial records through his firm's analysis software. I looked up from my phone and met David's panicked gaze. It looks like you've been claiming Victoria and her son as dependents on your business expense reports, filing fraudulent claims with your real estate firm, inflating your business costs to justify higher commission draws. The silence that followed was deafening. David opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for air. That's embezzlement, David. That's fraud. That's federal charges if your firm decides to prosecute. You can't prove. I already have proved it. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. Michael's firm has connections with forensic accountants who specialize in financial fraud cases. Everything I just showed you has been verified and documented. Helen has copies of everything, and she's already started filing the preliminary paperwork. David stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of our patio. When he turned back to me, his face had shifted from fear to anger. "You're trying to destroy me," he said. "You're trying to ruin my career, my reputation, my future." "No, David. You already did that. I'm just making sure there are consequences." "This is vindictive, Rebecca. This is cruel. We can work this out between us without involving lawyers and accountants and the way you work things out by dancing with your mistress in front of our son?" That stopped him. He deflated like a punctured balloon, sinking back into his chair. "David," I said quietly, "did you really think I was going to sit here and let you leave me for another woman while you took half of everything we built together to fund your new life? Did you think I was going to smile and nod while you moved our family's money into her bank account?" "I never meant for it to go this far," he whispered. "But it did go this far. And now you have to face the consequences." I picked up my phone again and opened one final folder, the one I had been saving for last. "This is from Sarah's investigation," I said. "It turns out Victoria has quite an interesting past. Did you know she's done this before?" David's head snapped up. "Done what before?" "Affair with a married man. Financial entanglement. Joint accounts and shared expenses." I scrolled through the screenshots Sarah had compiled. "Victoria Chin, that's her real last name, by the way, not Williams like she's been telling you, was involved with a married real estate developer in Phoenix 3 years ago. Same pattern. Expensive trips, money funneled into joint accounts, plans for him to leave his wife. That's different. He ended up losing his business, his marriage, and half his assets when his wife's lawyer discovered the financial irregularities. Victoria disappeared back to her maiden name and moved to a new city. Our city, David, where she got a job at a marketing firm that contracts with real estate companies." I watched the truth sink in, watched David realize that he hadn't been Victoria's great love story. He had been her next mark. "She's a predator, David. She targets successful married men in real estate, gets them emotionally invested, then systematically drains their resources while positioning herself for maximum financial gain when everything falls apart." "No," David said, but his voice was hollow. "No, what we have is real. She loves me. She loves your bank account. And now that it's empty and you're facing potential criminal charges, how much do you want to bet she'll be moving on to her next target?" As if summoned by our conversation, David's phone buzzed with a text message. He looked at it automatically, then his face went completely pale. "What does it say?" I asked. He didn't answer, so I reached across the table and turned his phone to face me. "Victoria. David, we need to talk. Some people from your company called me this morning asking questions about our business relationship. I think we should take a break until this blows over. I'm sorry." The final nail in the coffin. Victoria was already distancing herself, already protecting her own interests as the walls closed in around David. "She's gone," I said simply. "She got what she needed from you, and now she's moving on, just like she did in Phoenix." David stared at his phone like it might change what the message said if he looked at it long enough. When he finally looked up at me, there were tears in his eyes. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you pack a bag," I said. Helen filed an emergency restraining order this morning citing the financial fraud and the potential for asset dissipation. You have 2 hours to collect your personal belongings, and then you need to leave. Rebecca, please. The house is in my name, David. Remember? We put it in my name 3 years ago for tax purposes. You thought it was such a clever idea. Another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Another example of David's arrogance being turned against him. My parents are flying in this afternoon to help with Joshua. Helen will be here at noon with the paperwork. You'll be served with divorce papers, restraining order, and notice that all joint accounts have been frozen pending investigation of the financial irregularities. David looked around our backyard, at the garden we had planted together, at the swing set he had built for Joshua, at the life we had created over 10 years of marriage, and I think he finally understood that it was all gone. Where am I supposed to go? He asked. That's not my problem anymore, I said, standing up from the table. You should have thought about that before you decided to risk everything for a woman who was using you. I walked toward the house, then turned back one final time. Oh, and David? Your firm received an anonymous tip this morning about the irregularities in your expense reports. They'll probably be calling you for a meeting on Monday morning. The look of absolute devastation on his face should have satisfied me. Should have felt like justice, like revenge served at the perfect temperature. Instead, it just felt like the end of everything I had ever wanted. But sometimes, when someone betrays you completely, when they tear apart your family and steal your future, the only choice left is to make sure they can't do it to anyone else. Sometimes being the villain in someone else's story is the only way to be the hero in your own. David left our house at 11:47 a.m. on Sunday morning with 2 suitcases and the broken look of a man who had finally understood the true cost of his choices. I watched from Joshua's bedroom window as he loaded his car, as he stood for a moment in our driveway looking back at the life he was leaving behind, as he drove away from everything we had built together. Joshua was still sleeping, exhausted from the previous night's excitement and blissfully unaware that his father was gone. I had 2 hours before my parents arrived, 2 hours before Helen came with the legal paperwork, 2 hours to figure out how to tell my 8-year-old son that our family was about to change forever. But first, I had one more call to make. Victoria answered on the second ring, her voice carefully neutral. Rebecca? I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I'm sure you weren't, I said, settling into David's abandoned chair on our patio. I wanted to thank you. Silence on the other end of the line. Thank me, she finally asked. For showing me exactly who my husband really is. For forcing me to take a hard look at my marriage and realize how much I had been settling for. In a strange way, you did me a favor. Rebecca, I want you to know that I never intended. Oh, but you did intend it, I interrupted. Just like you intended it with Robert Martinez in Phoenix. Just like you'll intend it with the next married real estate agent who catches your eye. Another long silence. I don't know what you're talking about, Victoria said, but her voice had lost its confidence. Sarah Chun is a very thorough investigator. Amazing how much information is available when you know where to look. Divorce records, court filings, bankruptcy documents. Robert Martinez lost everything, didn't he? His business, his marriage, his house. And you disappeared right after the settlement was finalized. That was completely different. Was it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you have a very specific type. Successful, married, vulnerable to flattery and attention. You move to a new city, get a job that puts you in contact with real estate professionals, identify your target, and then systematically extract as much financial benefit as possible before moving on. I could hear Victoria breathing on the other end of the line, but she wasn't denying it anymore. The joint accounts, the shared expenses, the promises of a future together, it's all very calculated, isn't it? Very professional. What do you want? Victoria asked, her mask finally slipping completely. Nothing, I said. I already have everything I need. But I thought you should know that I've compiled quite a comprehensive file on your activities. Financial records, communication logs, documentation of your pattern of behavior. It's all very interesting reading. You can't prove anything. I don't have to prove anything to you, Victoria. But I might need to prove it to Robert Martinez's ex-wife, who I understand is still dealing with the financial aftermath of your last relationship. She might be very interested to know where you ended up. What do you want? Victoria asked again, but this time her voice was small, defeated. I want you to disappear, I said simply. I want you to pack up your son and move on to whatever city you've already picked out for your next hunting ground. I want you to stay away from my family, stay away from David, and stay away from anyone else in this town who might be vulnerable to your particular skill set. And if I don't, then I make sure everyone knows exactly who Victoria Chin really is. Your employer, your son's school, every real estate firm in the city. I make sure your reputation precedes you wherever you go next. The silence stretched between us, and I could almost hear Victoria calculating her options, weighing her choices. You have 48 hours, I added. After that, I start making phone calls. You're a vindictive bitch, Victoria said finally. No, I replied. I'm a mother protecting her family from a predator. There's a difference. I hung up and sat in the silence of our backyard, feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but wasn't regret either. Victoria would leave. I was certain of it. People like her only thrived in the shadows, and I had just pulled back the curtain. At 1:15, Helen arrived with a briefcase full of paperwork and an expression of professional sympathy that reminded me why I had always liked her. She spread documents across our kitchen table with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. The restraining order is temporary but renewable, she explained. It gives you exclusive use of the house and requires David to stay at least 500 yards away, unless he's picking up or dropping off Joshua for court-ordered visitation. What about his stuff? I asked, signing where she indicated. He can request a police escort to collect more belongings, but only with 48 hours notice, and only when you approve the timing. The goal is to minimize contact while we work through the financial issues. My parents arrived just as Helen was packing up her briefcase. Mom immediately pulled me into one of her fierce hugs, the kind that had fixed scraped knees and broken hearts throughout my childhood. Dad stood awkwardly in our entryway, holding a grocery bag and looking like he wanted to punch someone but wasn't sure who. Where's our grandson? Mom asked, still holding me tight. Upstairs, still sleeping. He had a big night at the community festival. I pulled back and looked at both of them. I need to tell him what's happening, but I don't know how. Together, Dad said simply. We'll figure it out together. Joshua woke up around 2 p.m., padding downstairs in his pajamas with his hair sticking up at impossible angles. His face lit up when he saw his grandparents, and for a moment, it was just a normal Sunday afternoon with family. Where's Dad? He asked, looking around the kitchen. Is he still sleeping? I had practiced this conversation in my head dozens of times, but sitting at our kitchen table with my son's trusting green eyes focused on me, every prepared speech disappeared. Daddy had to go stay somewhere else for a while, I said carefully. Mommy and Daddy are having some grown-up problems, and we need some time apart to figure things out. Joshua's face scrunched up in confusion. Like a timeout? Sort of like a timeout, yes. Because of the lady he was dancing with? The question hit me like a physical blow. I had underestimated how much Joshua had understood, how clearly he had seen what was happening at the festival. That's part of it, I said honestly. Daddy made some choices that hurt our family, and now we need to figure out how to fix things. Is he coming back? The question I had been dreading, the one I didn't have a good answer for. I don't know, sweetheart. But no matter what happens between Mommy and Daddy, we both love you very much. That will never change. Joshua nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness of someone much older than 8. Can I still see him? He asked. Of course you can see Daddy. We'll work out a schedule so you can spend time with him regularly. Okay, Joshua said, then brightened. Can Grandma and Grandpa stay for dinner? And just like that, we moved on to the immediate concerns of childhood, dinner plans and bedtime stories, and whether there would be pancakes for breakfast. But I caught my mother watching Joshua throughout the evening, saw the worry in her eyes, the recognition that this was just the beginning of a much longer, more difficult process. That night, after Joshua was in bed and my parents had settled into the guest room, I sat alone in my bedroom. Our bedroom, though it would never feel like ours again, and allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I had done. In the span of 24 hours, I had dismantled my marriage, destroyed my husband's career, and sent his mistress running. I had protected my son's financial future and ensured that David would face consequences for his choices. But I had also blown up the only life Joshua had ever known. I had turned myself into a single mother, a divorced woman, someone who would have to rebuild everything from scratch. The revenge felt hollow in the darkness, necessary but joyless. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "You win. We're leaving Tuesday morning. Victoria," keeping her word and protecting herself at the same time. Another message arrived 5 minutes later, this one from David. "Can we please talk? I know I messed up, but there has to be a way to fix this." I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without responding. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. They can only be cleared away to make room for something new. 3 days after David left, Joshua asked the question I had been dreading. "Mommy, is this my fault?" We were sitting at the breakfast table on Wednesday morning, Joshua picking at his cereal while I pretended to read emails on my laptop. He had been quieter than usual since Sunday, more clingy, waking up twice Monday night from dreams he wouldn't describe. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, immediately closing the laptop and giving him my full attention.
No.
"This is absolutely not your fault. Not even a tiny bit. But if I hadn't seen Daddy dancing with that lady, maybe you wouldn't have gotten mad at him." Children's logic is both heartbreaking and terrifyingly accurate. Joshua had connected the dots between the festival, his observation, and the sudden absence of his father. What he couldn't understand was that his father's choices had created this situation long before that dance. "Joshua, look at me," I said, moving to kneel beside his chair. "Daddy made some decisions that hurt our family. Those decisions had nothing to do with you, and they're not your responsibility to fix. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes have big consequences."
But I asked about it.
I asked why he was looking at her like he looks at you in the wedding pictures. The memory of that conversation hit me fresh. My 8-year-old son's devastating clarity, his innocent ability to see what all the adults in that room were pretending not to notice. "You were being honest about what you saw," I told him. "That's never wrong. You should always tell me what you're thinking and feeling, even when it's hard." Joshua nodded, but didn't look convinced. I could see him carrying this burden, this child's assumption that he had somehow caused his father's absence by speaking the truth. That afternoon, I called Dr. Sarah Hoffman, a family therapist my pediatrician had recommended. Getting Joshua into therapy felt like admitting failure, like acknowledging that I hadn't protected him well enough from the fallout of his father's choices. Children often blame themselves for their parents' divorce, Dr. Hoffman explained during our phone consultation. It's a normal response, but it's important to address it early. "How is he sleeping? Eating? Any changes in behavior at school?" "He's been having nightmares," I admitted. "And his teacher called yesterday to say he seems distracted in class. I can see him Friday afternoon if that works for you." I scheduled the appointment and added family therapy to the growing list of changes in our lives. Along with single parenting and divorce proceedings and financial reorganization. Helen had been busy. By Wednesday, David's real estate firm had placed him on administrative leave pending investigation of the expense report irregularities. His access to the office had been revoked, his company credit cards canceled, his pending commissions frozen until the accounting review was complete. "It's actually quite serious," Helen explained during our Thursday morning meeting. "If they find evidence of systematic fraud, which they will, based on what we've provided, he could face criminal charges." "Will that affect the divorce settlement?" "It should work in our favor. Dissipation of marital assets, fraudulent transfer of funds, these are serious legal issues that courts don't take lightly." The legal machinery was grinding forward with mechanical precision, but the human cost was becoming more apparent every day. David had been calling and texting constantly, begging for a chance to explain, to apologize, to work things out for Joshua's sake. I had blocked his number. Thursday evening, my mother was helping Joshua with homework when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged, professionally dressed, carrying a briefcase. Mrs. Harrison? My name is Detective Martinez with the County Fraud Division. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your husband's business practices. The investigation had gone criminal. David wasn't just losing his job and his marriage, he was going to be charged with embezzlement. I invited Detective Martinez in and spent 2 hours going through financial records, explaining what I had discovered about the joint accounts and hidden expenses. She was thorough but kind, clearly experienced in dealing with the collateral damage of white-collar crime. What happens to him now? I asked as she was leaving. That depends on what the district attorney's office decides to do with the case. But Mrs. Harrison? You did the right thing coming forward. Financial fraud cases are much harder to prosecute without cooperation from family members. After she left, I sat in my living room and tried to process the fact that my actions had potentially sent my son's father to prison. It felt like too much power, too much responsibility for the direction of another person's life. But then I remembered the $63,000, money that should have gone to Joshua's future. I remembered David dancing with Victoria while our son watched in confusion. I remembered the text messages, the lies, the systematic betrayal of every promise he had made to our family. He had made his choices. I was just making sure there were consequences. Friday afternoon, I took Joshua to see Dr. Hoffman. She was a warm woman in her 50s with an office full of toys and art supplies, the kind of therapist who made talking about feelings seem as natural as breathing. While Joshua played with building blocks in the corner, she asked me about our routine, our support system, our plans for helping him adjust to the new reality. Children are resilient, she assured me, but they need consistency and honesty. How much have you told him about why his father left? That Daddy made choices that hurt our family, and now we need time apart to figure things out. That's good. Age-appropriate, but honest. She watched Joshua build an elaborate castle with the blocks. Have you heard from his father? David's been trying to call, but I've blocked his number. He hasn't tried to see Joshua yet. That might be difficult for Joshua to understand. From his perspective, Daddy just disappeared. The guilt hit me fresh and sharp. In my rush to protect our finances and ensure David faced consequences for his fraud, had I been too harsh? Had I denied Joshua the chance to maintain a relationship with his father? What should I do? Consider supervised visitation. A neutral location, limited time, someone present to ensure appropriate boundaries. Joshua needs to know his father didn't abandon him, even if the marriage is ending. That evening, I unblocked David's number long enough to send one message. You can see Joshua this Saturday at the community center from 2 to 4 p.m. I'll be present. No discussion of adult issues. This is about your relationship with your son. His response came within minutes. Thank you. I'll be there. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of October afternoon that makes everything feel melancholy. Joshua had been excited but anxious about seeing his father, asking repeatedly what they would do during their visit. David was already waiting in the community center parking lot when we arrived, standing beside a car I didn't recognize, probably a rental, since his BMW was likely to be repossessed along with everything else. He looked terrible, thinner than he had been just a week ago, wearing clothes that looked like he'd slept in them, stubble that suggested he'd given up on daily shaving. When Joshua ran toward him, David's face transformed with relief and joy. Hey, buddy, he said, catching Joshua in a fierce hug. I've missed you so much. Where have you been staying, Daddy? Joshua asked, pulling back to look at his father's face. With a friend, David said vaguely. But that doesn't matter. Tell me about school. Tell me about everything I've missed. I watched them together. My son chattering excitedly about his spelling test and the new book his teacher was reading to the class, my estranged husband hanging on every word like Joshua was describing the cure for cancer. Whatever else David had done, whatever mistakes he had made, his love for Joshua was real and uncomplicated. Watching them, I felt the first crack in the wall of anger I had built around my heart. But love wasn't enough to undo the damage. Love didn't restore the stolen money or rebuild the trust or explain to an 8-year-old why his father had risked everything for a woman who had already disappeared. When the 2 hours were up, Joshua clung to David like he might never see him again. "When can I see you again, Daddy?" "Soon, buddy. Very soon." David looked at me over Joshua's head, and I saw the question in his eyes. "We'll work out a regular schedule," I said. "Through the lawyers." That night, Joshua cried himself to sleep. Not the dramatic crying of a tantrum, but the quiet, devastating tears of a child who understands that his world has changed forever and there's nothing he can do to fix it. I sat beside his bed until he fell asleep, smoothing his hair and promising him that everything would be okay, even though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Change is hard, even when it's necessary. Even when it's the result of someone else's choices and betrayals. Even when you know you're doing the right thing. Sometimes the right thing feels like punishment for everyone involved. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our house, my house now, legally and financially, watching Joshua help my mother make pancakes while I read an email that would change everything again. "Mrs. Harrison, I wanted to personally thank you for your cooperation in our investigation. Mr. Harrison has agreed to plead guilty to charges of embezzlement and fraud. As part of his plea agreement, he'll be required to make full restitution to his former employer and serve 18 months in minimum security prison. The case will be closed by the end of the month." 18 months. David would be in prison for 18 months, leaving me as Joshua's only parent, leaving my son to wonder why his father had disappeared not just from our house but from the world entirely. I closed my laptop and watched my mother show Joshua how to flip pancakes without making a mess. He had grown taller in the months since David left, his face losing some of its baby softness, his questions becoming more sophisticated and harder to answer. "Mommy," he said, carefully turning a pancake that looked more like abstract art than breakfast food, "Tommy's dad is coaching Little League this spring. Can I sign up?" "Of course, sweetheart. Will you come to my games?" "I wouldn't miss them." He nodded seriously, then returned his attention to the pancakes. These conversations had become routine, Joshua testing whether I would be there for the big moments, whether this new version of our family could still provide the security and consistency he needed. The truth was, I had become a different person in those 6 months. Not just a single mother, though that was part of it. Not just a divorced woman, though the papers had been finalized 2 months earlier. I had become someone I didn't recognize, stronger, more decisive, more willing to fight for what mattered. My freelance graphic design business had exploded after word got out about how I had handled David's betrayal. Other women started reaching out, asking for help with their own investigations, their own divorces, their own fights for justice. I had inadvertently become the person other betrayed spouses called when they needed someone who understood the importance of documentation, strategy, and following the money. "You should consider expanding," Helen had suggested during our last meeting. "Maybe partner with a private investigator, offer comprehensive services for people going through difficult divorces." The idea had merit. I had skills I never knew I possessed, research abilities, analytical thinking, the capacity for long-term planning even under emotional duress. Skills that could help other families protect themselves from the kind of systematic betrayal David had inflicted on us. But first, I had to tell Joshua about his father's prison sentence. Dr. Hoffman and I had discussed it extensively. Joshua knew David was dealing with some legal problems but didn't understand the full scope of what that meant. How do you explain to a 9-year-old that his father is going to prison for stealing money? Age-appropriate honesty, Dr. Hoffman had advised. He needs to know it's not his fault, and he needs to know when he'll see his father again. That afternoon, after my parents had returned to their hotel and Joshua had finished his homework, I asked him to sit with me on the couch. "I need to tell you something about Daddy," I began. Joshua immediately tensed, the way he had learned to do whenever adult conversations began with that particular tone. "Daddy made some mistakes with money at his job," I continued. "He has to go away for a while to accept responsibility for those mistakes." "Go away where?" "To a place where people stay when they've broken certain laws. It's called prison." The word hung in the air between us. I watched Joshua's face process this information, watched him work through what it meant. "Like jail?" he asked quietly. "Yes, like jail. But it's a safe place, and he'll be able to call us and write letters." "How long?" 18 months. That's a year and a half. Joshua was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands folded in his lap. Did he steal money? He finally asked. The directness of the question caught me off guard. I had been prepared for tears, for anger, for confusion. I hadn't expected such clinical curiosity. Yes, I said honestly. He took money that belonged to his company and used it for things that weren't work-related. Is that why Victoria left? Even 6 months later, hearing her name was like getting punched in the stomach. But Joshua had a right to understand the connections between his father's choices and their consequences.
Partly yes.
When people break the law, it affects everyone around them. Joshua nodded thoughtfully. Can I write him letters? Of course. We can write him letters and send pictures. And when he gets out, you'll be able to spend time with him again. Will you still be divorced? Yes, sweetheart. That won't change. But you'll always have both of us as your parents, even if we're not married to each other. That evening, Joshua asked to look at photo albums, something he hadn't done since David left. We sat together on his bedroom floor, looking through pictures of birthday parties and family vacations, Christmas mornings and ordinary Tuesday afternoons, when we had been happy, without knowing how precious that happiness was. I miss how things used to be, Joshua said, running his finger over a photo from his 7th birthday party, David pushing him on the backyard swing while I laughed in the background. I miss it too, I admitted. But sometimes when things break, we have to build something new instead of trying to fix what's broken. Like when I broke my Lego castle and built a spaceship instead? Exactly like that. 3 weeks later, David called from prison. I had debated whether to accept the call, whether Joshua was ready for direct contact, whether I was strong enough to hear David's voice without falling apart. But when the automated system announced the incoming call, I handed the phone to Joshua and watched him light up at the sound of his father's voice. Hi, Daddy. Are you okay? Is it scary there? I wrote you a letter, but I don't know if you got it yet. The conversation lasted 20 minutes, the maximum allowed for prisoner calls. Joshua chattered about school and friends and the book he was reading, while David asked questions and made jokes and sounded more like himself than he had in months. When the call ended, Joshua was beaming. He sounds okay, he told me. He said he's taking classes and working in the library. He said he's proud of how brave I've been. That night, I lay in bed thinking about forgiveness, about second chances, about the difference between justice and revenge. David was paying the price for his choices, his freedom, his career, his reputation, his family. Victoria had disappeared entirely, probably already working on her next target in some other city. But Joshua still loved his father. And despite everything David had done, despite the lies and the theft and the humiliation, I couldn't quite bring myself to hate him completely. Maybe that was growth. Maybe that was healing. Or maybe it was just the exhaustion that comes from carrying anger for too long. The next morning brought another email that would reshape our future. Mrs. Harrison, my name is Patricia Wong, and I represent 3 women who are interested in working with you to start a consulting firm specializing in asset protection and investigation services for individuals going through high-conflict divorces. We've heard about your case and are impressed with your thorough approach to financial investigation. Would you be interested in discussing a business partnership? I stared at the email for a long time, then looked out the kitchen window at Joshua playing in our backyard. He was building something elaborate with sticks and rocks, the kind of purposeful construction project that had always been his way of processing big emotions. A business partnership. A chance to turn the skills I had learned through necessity into something that could help other families. A way to build something positive from the wreckage of my marriage. I thought about the woman I had been 6 months ago, trusting, naive, focused on maintaining peace at any cost. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood the importance of asking hard questions, following the money, and refusing to accept comfortable lies. Maybe that was revenge, after all. Not the destruction of David's life, but the construction of my own. Not tearing him down, but building myself up. I opened a new email and began typing my response to Patricia Wong. If you've been with me through this entire story, if you've watched me navigate betrayal and divorce and single parenthood, then you know that revenge isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about survival. Sometimes it's about refusing to let someone else's choices define your future. David lost everything: his job, his marriage, his freedom, his reputation. But in the process, I found something I didn't know I was looking for. I found my strength, my voice, my capacity to fight for what mattered. I found myself. And maybe that's the best revenge of all, becoming someone better than the person who tried to destroy you ever had the imagination to be. Joshua finished his construction project and ran toward the house, his face bright with accomplishment. "Mom," he called, "come see what I built." I saved the email draft and went outside to admire my son's creation. It was a fortress, he explained, complete with walls and towers and a bridge that could be raised and lowered. "It's beautiful," I told him. "What's it for?" "For protecting the people inside," he said seriously. "So they're safe no matter what happens outside." Smart boy. He was learning the same lesson I had learned, that sometimes you have to build your own walls, create your own safety, become your own protector. "Can you help me make it stronger?" he asked. "Always," I promised. "We'll make it as strong as it needs to be." And we did. Together, we built something that could withstand whatever storms might come our way. We built the life that belonged to us, a future that no one could take away, a family that was small but unbreakable. We built our revenge by refusing to be broken. And if you've made it this far, if my story has touched something in your own experience, please let me know in the comments below. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in fighting for what matters, even when it's hard. Sometimes the best way to get revenge is simply to thrive without the person who thought they could destroy you. Sometimes the best way to win is to build something beautiful from the pieces they left behind. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here while I found my way from the ruins of one life to the foundation of another. Now, go build your own fortress. Make it as strong as it needs to be. You deserve nothing less.